stage.
She eats every 30 minutes.
We must still be growing.
That's what
I'm at my growing stage.
I'm trying to stop growing.
I'm not
I'm
finished.
trying,
with it.
it's hard to do.
If I die, just come to Terry and said, you know, you had my cookbook, you know,
I'll
I can
write
give it
that
back.
down.
She's got dozens of cookbooks.
All right, he walked out, so I guess we're on film now. So don't say anything about the preacher, Barbara.
You was going to, wasn't you?
You'll say, does he feel well today? He looks good, he feels good.
Can't believe he's still walking around looking like that. Well, I went and saw Randy today. He's got 2 electric razors. That boy has the hardest time keeping up with cords. 2 electric razors and has not got a cord to charge either one of them. So I took one of them home with me and I went online and ordered a charging cord for it. I think I'm going to charge it up, take it to him, bring the other one home and charge it and take it to him when I go the next time and just keep the charging cord at the house.
Same charging cord as an iPhone, or?
No.
It's different.
It's on the Relco. It's got the little
Relco.
plug-in thing.
Yeah, it's like a little free.
Yeah.
Whole thing.
Now that when I looked at the when I put it in the Amazon and looked it up, it showed a HDMI connection for, you know, it had the end that goes into the razor, but then you could plug the other one into a charging cord like a phone cord.
Yeah.
But I said, well, ain't no use in adding another complication.
Oh yeah, he'll lose it.
But and he, I told y'all last week I went in there and he told me that there wasn't no receptacle by his bed, and I went in there and I said, well, Randy, there it is. It's like this far above his pillow in the bed, and it's just sitting there and wasn't nothing in the way. And I said, there it is right there. And he said, well, I knew I had that. I just ain't got a cord. And I said, that's what you said, Randy. He said, yeah, it is. So I went back in there Friday and was heading toward his room, and he said, well, the problem is, he said, the guy that I share the room with, he's got receptacles over there, but I don't have any receptacles. I said, okay, Randy, I showed you last week where your receptacle was, and I'll show it to you again today. It's kind of back behind your pillow. I guess that's why I ain't never seen it. I walked in there, and there it is. You can see it. Walk in the front, you know, I almost walk in the room, and there it is, you know. I went over and I said, there's one, and they said, on the other side of the bed, there's 2 more. Because there's one above each bed, and then there's like 2 or 3 in the middle. So I said, you got receptacles? He said, but I don't have no cords. And I said, okay, we ain't doing that again. But he was doing a little better, other than his razor wasn't working. But he likes his new roommate better. They get along evidently. So I used to try to take him out, but it was like 98 degrees Friday, and I didn't take him outside Friday.
Oh yeah, it's hot.
But I have to try to get over there and take him out and get a hamburger or something one day. All right. Let me see. I don't know if. See what? Yeah, we already talked about the bake sale proceeds. That worked out real well. Everybody come through and made good donations to that. Some of the most expensive cookies. But we appreciate everybody coming out and picking up that and taking care of that. The girls thought that was great. It didn't occur to them that people was probably just giving donations. They said $352 for 12 cookies. That's good. But they enjoyed doing it. Liz enjoyed doing it with them. Harper came back over the other day for something, and she looked at the kitchen table and it had regular stuff on it. And she said, why you got all that stuff on the table? And Liz said, well, that's how it usually. Well, she thought it was supposed, you know, she had everything off the table when they was making cookies. So, and she put everything back. Well, why is all that stuff done on the table? She thought we was cooking cookies again, I guess. She told Liz she needed some dessert. Just some dessert. So they made some dessert. All right, we wrap up the book of Judges this week, and then we got 2 weeks of Ruth, and then it looks like we go into Romans. So we got the new books
All right.
already. So you want to take it to Randy, I guess. But we wrap up Judges. Judges. I mentioned a little bit last week before my song about the book of Judges kind of gives everybody a little bit of encouragement that maybe we're going to be all right after all, because God was able to use them knuckleheads. Really, none of the, I think the preacher even mentioned that none of the judges really seem to be real good people. But God finds a way of using people even when they don't really want to be. After we had covered last week, we've talked about Gideon. We talked about the minor judges that came in between, and then Jephthah came in, and he's the one that the last one that we talked about. That he had won a big victory, and there was like 40 years of good times, and then some of the more minor judges came in again, and then as they died out. Now all these judges weren't coming like one right after another, because when you talk about Samson here, the Philistines were kind of in power. Well, that's the same thing that you saw with some of the other judges. So they might have been living at the same time in different parts of Israel. And that's kind of, I've got a Bible that's called a Chronological Study Bible. And I've got 2 or 3 different chronological Bibles. But as you're reading through the Old Testament, a lot of times it gets confusing, because you'll read through Chronicles and it'll tell you about something, and you get over to Kings and well, that sounds like the same story. Well, it is. It's a different, one of them's written from one point of view and one's written from the other, kind of like the Gospels. They're all telling the same story, but it sounds different because different people look at it at different angles, and they address it to different people. So some of these judges were living at the same time in different places, just dealing with small areas. They could not cover the kind of territory that, like yesterday we ran to Scottsboro and back, and it wasn't a big deal at all, but that would have been a journey back in those days to go all the way over there. It probably took all week long to get there, and then all week long the next week to get back. So they were not able to cover the bigger areas, so there were probably 1 or 2 of these judges living at any given time. But after all of what happened in last week's lesson, it seems like every time it ends with that same little statement, and the people did what was right in their own eyes. There was no king, and there was no judge, and there was no king, so the people did what was right in their own. In other words, they acted like we do most of the time. They did whatever come to their mind. And for 40 years, the Philistines reigned over them and kept them in slavery. Starting in the 13th chapter, which is where last week's ended off, really, there was a man named Zorah. Never mentions his wife's name. A man named Zorah, and his wife was barren and without child. Several places in the Bible we see women who were barren that God gives them children. So Zorah's wife was barren and could not have children. And an angel of the Lord appeared to his wife and told her, he said, you need to refrain from drinking wine or strong drink, because you're going to have a child, and he's going to be a Nazirite from birth. The Nazirite vow was a vow that was taken. It's kind of like most of the time people would take the Nazirite vow for 30 days or 6 months or whatever. And during that period of time, you would refrain from drinking any alcohol, refrain from anything come from the vine. You would stay away from, they couldn't touch anything dead, even if it was a family member. They couldn't have anything to do with a dead body of any kind. They were not able, they were setting themselves apart for that period of time. But I believe Samson is the only Nazarite that was designated by God a Nazarite from birth. So his whole life was not a 1 month or 6 months or a year, but his whole life he was considered under the Nazarite vow. But if you pay close attention to the story of Samson, you'll find out he didn't really pay much attention to all that. You couldn't cut your hair, which is the thing that Samson's most famous about. That was one of the things you didn't, the Nazarite never cut their hair during that period of time that they were. So he had not cut his hair. So after he had been born, the angel come to his mother, and then she went to his father, and he said, well, okay, but I'd kind of like this guy to come tell us a little more about how to take care of a child like that. So he prays to God, and God sends the angel again, and this time it's just his wife there, and she says, hold on. She runs and gets him and comes back, and they talk to the angel, but the angel doesn't really, the angel of the Lord, as it says, did not give them really much more information than what they did the first time. But he said, well, wait here, let me go kill a lamb and fix a meal. And he said, well, even if you killed a lamb, I wouldn't eat it, but if you want to make an offering to the Lord. So he prepared it as an offering to the Lord and set it on the stones, and fire came up out of the stone and consumed it. And as fire was flowing and the smoke was going up, the angel of the Lord went up with the smoke. And all of a sudden they realized that wasn't just an angel. That was God. That was probably what they call a Christophany, or there's 2 or 3 different names they use. But in other words, it was like Jesus Christ appearing before his birth in Bethlehem. But he would not have asked for a burnt offering if it had been an angel. So we feel like it was actually the presence of the Spirit of Jesus Christ even before his birth in Jerusalem. In Bethlehem. So the child was born, and he grew up, and things were going good with him, and they didn't cut his hair, and they kept him away. She stayed away from all that while she was expecting, and kept him away from the bad things and the foods and all. But then he got to growing up a little bit, and he became a teenage boy. And we all know what that's like. But he was a little bit girl crazy. And he went out and he found him a girl that really caught his eye, and he come home and he told him, he said, this girl from Timnah. He said, I want you to go arrange, I want her to be my wife. I want y'all to go take care of it. And they said, Timnah, that's a Philistine town. You couldn't find somebody from the children of Israel? You had to go to the Philistines of all people? And he said, she's the one for me. She's my soulmate. That's I'm sure that's probably what he said. That's what everybody says when they think it's the right one. It's my soulmate. But so they said, well, okay. So they go and they make the trip down, and they talk to her parents, and they try to set this up, and then they come back and they prepare and they get ready for the wedding feast. In those days, a wedding took like a week, so it was a 7-day feast. And so they come back and they're having this 7-day feast. But on their way back, on their way to see the parents, he took his parents in there to arrange this thing. On the way, he kind of walked away from them for something, and a lion jumped out and attacked him. Well, it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he ripped the lion, and just like he was a puppy. Just took him, just tore him apart, threw him down on the ground. Well, he touching the dead animal. So that was already breaking his vow right there, you know. So he goes back and he didn't say anything to his parents about it. They just went on about their business. And as they were coming back after the visit, he said, he thought he'd go over there and look, check on it, and said the lion's carcass was laying there, and a hive of bees had taken up home in that thing, and there was honey in it. So you can imagine this. Now here's a dead lion that's been laying there for probably a week or two, maybe. And it's got honey in it. What's the first thing comes to your mind? Sure, scoop it up and let's eat some. So he scoops it up, and there's the honeycomb up in his hands. Don't know how, kept from getting stung. Evidently he didn't care. And not only that did he take this honey out of this dead carcass that was violation, he brought it and gave some to his parents. So he kind of, without them knowing it, defiled them as well. So then they went on back, and then they came back for the wedding. And the wedding feast was for 7 days, and they didn't really trust Samson too much, so they picked out 30 young men to kind of spend the week with him and keep an eye on him and watch him and make sure he didn't get into any trouble. So Samson, he was a little bit cocky already, and he told him, he said, well, let me give you a riddle. He said, out of the strong came something sweet. Out of the killer comes something to eat. Something like that, pretty close to that. And he said, if you can solve this riddle, I'll give each of you a change of clothing. And if you can't by the end of the week, then you all have to give me a change of clothing. And they decided right off they couldn't figure out this riddle, and they weren't going to lose, so they went to his fiancée, as it turned out, and told her, said, you need to find out what the answer to this riddle is, or we're going to kill you and all your family. They were bad losers. They didn't want to lose at all. So she went to him and she says, you must really not love me. You've given them this riddle, and you hadn't even told me the answer. He said, I ain't told nobody the answer. He said, I ain't even told my parents the answer. Why would I tell you? She kept on. Finally, he gave her the answer. So the last day of the feast, before the time period was up, these guys came to him and they said, well, what's stronger than a lion and what's sweeter than honey? So he said, well, if you hadn't got it from her, you wouldn't have known. So he knew she had been unfaithful to him. She had betrayed him. So he kind of left mad and never did consummate the marriage as it was. So he went home mad. So in a little while he got to feeling bad about it. So he said, well, let me go back and see her. So he took a lamb to offer to her father and everything. He went back and he said, I've come to see my bride, and I want to go ahead and finish, consummate the marriage and start our lives together. And her father said, well, we thought she was mad at us, so I gave her to one of the groomsmen. But she got a little sister. How about her? You take her? You got to wonder what. It's just kind of funny sometimes when you think about how things were done and how it went. And so Samson said, no, that ain't the deal. He said, you will pay for this. So he got mad and he tore up town and messed up a bunch of folks. So then they get mad at him and they come looking for him. So after he does that, he goes and hides out somewhere. And they get an army together and they come after him. And they come to this man and his daughter and they said, where is he? And they said, well, we think he's, they find out where he's at. And they go to the town where he was. And they said, you need to turn him over to us or we're going to destroy the whole town. So they go out to him and they said, well, we've come to bind you and take you and turn you over to the Philistines so they don't destroy our town. So Samson had already figured out a lot of times these situations would arise to give him opportunity to do damage to the Philistines, because he was always killing a bunch of Philistines. When he lost the riddle, when they solved the riddle, you know, they said, okay, you owe us 30 changes of clothes. Well, he didn't have 30 changes of clothes to give him. So he said, okay, I'll be back tomorrow. He went to the next town over, another Philistine town, and he just picked him out 30 guys and killed them all and took the clothes off of them, brought them back and said, here you go. You know, so, you know, these guys didn't do anything to him. And he just went and killed them and brought them back and said, here's the clothes I told you I'd give you. So, you know, that made him that kind of made them mad at him and everything, so they sent this group after him. So some of his own people come after him and said, we've got to take you and turn you over to the Philistines or they're going to do harm to us. And he said, okay, just promise to me you're not going to do me any harm. They said, no, we're not. We're just going to tie you up and take you to them. So they tied him up with 2 new ropes. And so they took him in and they said, 3,000 men, 3,000 Philistine soldiers. And, you know, you got to figure it's one guy, and they sent 3,000 soldiers. He must have already had a little reputation. Must have been like Rambo. But they turn him over, and as soon as they reach to get him, he just kind of flexes, and then all them ropes just snap like they were thread. And he picks up the jawbone of a donkey and kills 1,000 men with that jawbone. I guess the other 2,000 decided they didn't want him bad as they thought once they seen the first 1,000 die, because they left him alone and he left. But then because of all of that, they went back. They said, well, this all started by this man giving his wife away. So they went back and killed him and her, burn them with fire. Well, then that made him mad too, because that was supposed to have been his wife. So he said, okay, well now I'll get revenge. So he catches 300 foxes. Don't know how he did that. Can't imagine that. And he took two foxes and tied their tails together and put a torch between it and lit that thing. And so then he had 150 of these pairs of foxes with a torch between them, and he'd set them loose. And they went out through the vineyards and the grain fields and the corn fields and everything, and burnt everything. Burnt everything to the olive orchards, everything, burnt it to the ground. So he was just continuously, every time they'd do something to him, he'd come back and do something to them. So then it moves on. He said he went down the road a little ways, and he came to a little town, and he once again found him a prostitute, and he went in and spending the night with her, and the people in town found out he was in town. They said, well, we'll just wait till he comes out and we'll get him and turn him over to the authorities. Somehow he figured out they were waiting on him, so he woke up in the middle of the night. You know, these little towns, they would have a wall around the town, these big heavy gates for security. Well, he woke up in the middle of the night and he went out there and he just tore the gates up, post and all, carried him on his back, set him up on a hill, so that when they got up the next morning and figured out they was gone, they'd look up there and they'd be standing up on the hill. One place it says, you know, like 30 miles away. I doubt that he carried them 30 miles away, but he may have. I don't see the purpose for that. I think he would have wanted to just carry them up there, and so they'd look up there and say, well, it's a lot of security that was. So he kind of foiled their plan there. And then he goes on, and then eventually he meets Delilah, and that's pretty much where today's lesson picks up. And everybody's heard the story of Samson and Delilah, and you figure the guy must have he couldn't have been very smart, because it was obvious every time he would hook up with one of these women, it was obvious they were all, going to betray him, because the Philistines wanted him so bad that they were going to come and threaten these people, and they were going to betray him. So he meets up with Delilah, and he's fallen in love, and I don't know if he ever actually married Delilah or what, but he was with her every day. And the Philistines came to her and they said, there was like 3 of them, they said that we will give you 1,100 shekels of silver each. It's a lot of money. if you will help us figure out how to bind him. So she said, okay. So she went in there, and they were laying around, and they'd been together all night or something, and she said, well, what gives you all of your strength? He said, how are you so strong, and is there any way that someone could bind you? He said, well, if you took 7 bowstrings, and when it says bowstrings, it says this was kind of like the ligaments from an animal that they would use as a bowstring. But he said 7 fresh bowstrings and tied, he said, then I would be as helpless as a child, like any other man. So she waits till he gets to sleep, and she takes 7 fresh bowstrings and she ties them up real good. And then she hollers, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he jumps up, and they come in after him, and all of a sudden he just pop, snaps those things like thread again, you know, and kills a bunch of them and leaves. So then he comes back another time, and she said, you didn't tell me the truth. I want you to tell me the truth. And he said, okay. He said, if you took 7 brand new ropes and tied me that had never been used for work, 7 brand new ropes, then I would be harmless. So she waits till he goes to sleep again, and she ties him up with these 7 ropes. She says, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he jumped up again and snapped all those ropes and killed a bunch more Philistines. Every time they'd losing more Philistines, you know, and that was his purpose, was to punish the Philistines. So then she comes back to him again, and she says, you keep lying to me. You must not love me, and all this. And he said, well, he said, if you take my hair and braid it into the loom, which I don't understand exactly how it is, but anyhow, they braided his 7 locks of hair, braid them all together, and then take a big loom spike and back it again. He said, I will be helpless. And so she does that while he's asleep again. And
God must have put him in some kind of a super deep sleep, because
yeah,
for all that to take
Yeah,
place and him not wake
well,
up.
you know, the commentaries I read said probably it was due to the fact that he didn't think so much about all these vows that he had taken, so he probably passed out from drinking. Because this particular area was known for its vineyards and grape harvests and stuff. So they figured he probably was drinking pretty heavy, so she probably got him drunk and he passed out. But she weaves his hair, and she takes the loom, the spike, and drives it. She said, got him anchored down, and she said, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And once again, he jumps up, and he just pops all that off, and kills a bunch more Philistines. And so the 4th time she comes to him, and she said, you have 3 times you have just mocked me and made fun of me and lied to me, and if you really love me, you need to tell me the truth. And she kept on and kept on and kept on, until finally he said, okay, I'm going to tell you the truth. He says, from my birth, my hair has never been cut. If my hair is shaved off, I'll lose my strength. So she goes back to these men, and she said, give me one more shot. I think he's told me the truth this time. So he goes to sleep again, and they cut all of his hair off and shave his head. And so here come the Philistines, and she said, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he says, well, I'll just jump up and whoop them like I always have. But he didn't realize the Spirit of the Lord had left him. Now, his hair was not the thing that gave him his strength. His vow, his commitment to God was what gave him the strength. God's Spirit was what gave him the strength. But he continuously showed that his vow didn't mean anything to him. And he was not true to that vow, and he wouldn't keep it. And finally, the last final thing that he had all of his life, he had at least kept that part of the vow. He hadn't cut his hair. And the last thing, and now he's broken that too. And finally God just says, okay, I'm done. And sometimes we push God, and we keep doing things, and God keeps coming back to us. But there's going to be a point where we're going to feel some repercussions from what we have done. And at this point, God said, okay, I guess the only way you're going to learn a lesson is for me to not pull you out of the fire this time. I've seen people do that. I had a friend that had a daughter that seemed like every time he would come in, he tried to do everything he could to help her. And finally, he just got to the point, he said, I can't do it no more. And he stopped. And she ended up in jail. And he said it about broke his heart to do it. But he said he had to quit. He said by every time pulling her out, he was just enabling her to do it again. So God, basically that's what he did. He said, okay, Samson, I'm not getting you out of this one. So this time the Philistines take him and they bind him, and the first thing they do is they gouge his eyes out so that he can't see. And in the commentaries it says that this was kind of a symbol of what was getting him in trouble was his eyes, because every time he got into a problem it was because he was lusting over some woman. So if he couldn't see, maybe that helped. So they gouged out his eyes. So they put him in the mill. And you've probably seen pictures of bulls and oxen and stuff pushing that big old rock around. Well, that's what Samson had to do. He was pushing the millstone, and he worked hard all day doing that. So the Philistines were celebrating. They were having a big old party, and they were worshiping Dagon. They, after all of this, they come in and they said, Dagon has turned him over to us. Dagon didn't do nothing, but they were giving Dagon the credit for turning Samson, their mighty enemy, turned him over to them. So they had him. So they said, well, bring him out here so we can kind of look at him, we can see him and make fun of him. And so they brought him out. And he said a young boy led him out by the hand and brought him out. He couldn't see. They were in this big coliseum, and it had like a big old balcony up here. And it had these two, I can't imagine how a building is built that two columns within arm's reach together supports the whole roof of the thing. But this, this is the way this one was built. And one of the commentaries I read said that an archaeological group had come across the ruins of a temple similar to this, and there were two big huge columns that they said it was probably, they built those columns up and then they just kind of propped everything up on it, all the way around, and that's how they built it, like a tent stake in the middle of a tent. So he's standing there, and it says, and his hair had begun to grow back, which again leads you to think that the power was in his hair, but it wasn't. But before, when he had cried out to God, he referred to him as Adonai Elohim, which was God, but it wasn't the God, Lord God. It wasn't like Yahweh. The Jewish people, they were calling Adonai Yahweh. That was supreme God. So he's standing there, he's blind, and this young boy's led him in, and he tells the young boy, he said, can you take me to the post that, so that I can kind of lean up against the post? I'm tired from pushing that old heavy stone. So the little boy brought him here, and he was able to get a hold of both those posts to kind of hold himself up. And he prayed to God, this time Elohim Yahweh. He said, God, he finally gave in. He finally surrendered to God. He said, I've messed up, but if you'll give me strength from one more time. But even in this, he said, give me strength one more time so that I can kill a bunch of these people in revenge for losing my eyes. He said, but let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed on those two columns, and those two columns fell, and he said the balcony fell. And so all the people in the balcony, said there were like 3,000 people in the balcony. And they all fell, and of course they fell on top of the ones that were below him. He said he killed more people in his death than he did in his whole life. So he had destroyed, and all of the major leaders of the Philistines were in this big balcony. They had got them all, brought them all together. So he got all of them at one time, all the major leaders. So he dealt a heavy blow to the Philistines at this time. But he had lived a life of rebellion against God and against the vow that God had placed upon him. But God had still used him to punish the Philistines, which was his purpose. Sometimes it's easy for us, and we can look back on our lives and say, God, you keep being faithful to me, and I keep turning on you, and I keep rebelling, I keep sinning, I keep doing things I know I shouldn't do, or I don't do things that I know I should do. And but we look here at Samson, and he was definitely an example of a person that had lots of flaws in his character. You know, the only things that's told here, it seems like, are bad things. I'm sure there were times when he did what he was supposed to do, and there were probably times when he accomplished what he was supposed to accomplish and was committed the way that he was supposed to be committed. But the major things, the only things that are recorded in the scriptures here in Judges is basically times when he got into trouble because of bad decisions and because of trusting people that he knew he shouldn't be able to trust. But God had said God had placed him in this position so that he could do harm to the Philistines. So even in rebellion, you know, we see that all through the scriptures. As you know, Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, but he ended up that Joseph was supposed to go ahead to Egypt and set up the system that ended up saving the whole family from starvation, which led to the beginning of the Israel nation. But they thought they were doing him wrong, and he felt like they were doing him wrong, but it ended up putting him in a position to do what God needed him to do. Jesus is the best example. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't hurt anybody. But Satan manipulated people to the point that they killed him. But that was what he came for. So that again accomplished his purpose. All through the scriptures we see things happening that doesn't seem to be right. It doesn't seem to be good. It seems to be like people are being mistreated. But, you know, when Saul started killing Christians, that was a terrible thing. But the purpose, the result of him starting the killing of the Christians and searching for them is it caused them to scatter. And that's what Jesus had told them. He said, go into all the nations and teaching and baptizing. But they were just clustering around together, staying in one spot. And so God said, you got to find a way to scatter them somehow. So he threw Saul down in the middle of them, and they scattered. So then they scattered to all the far parts of the world trying to get away from persecution, and they carried the gospel with them. So a lot of times hardships and bad decisions and problems and mistreatment, sometimes God uses that as his way of accomplishing what he wanted done. And a lot of times it's because we didn't listen to the first suggestion. You know, God says, do what I want you to do. We say, I don't think I want to. He said, okay, well, we'll get to it another way. We'll cause you to. I've heard people say before, you know, a lot of times if you don't take time to listen to what God has to say to you, you might find yourself laying on your back looking up at him for a long time. You know, he may put you in the bed, or may put you down to where you ain't got nothing but time, and then you'll say, okay, well, let's talk. So we need to try to make sure we don't allow it to get that point with us, that we don't make the bad decisions over and over again like Samson did. and we follow God's direction, and we pay attention to what He's asking us to do. That ends up Judges. Next week we spend the next 2 weeks on Ruth. The story of Ruth is pretty short and pretty simple, but God used people all through the Bible that were unlikely heroes, and so Ruth was again one of those. And Ruth was a Moabite. She wasn't even from Israel. She wasn't an Israelite at all. But when you read the history of Jesus and his ancestors in the beginning of Matthew and Luke, I think, Ruth is in there. So God uses people that are unlikely, and He can use us. So we just need to be willing and ready to listen and follow Him. Father, we thank You for today. We thank You for this opportunity to study Your Scriptures and read the stories of people through the Scriptures, God, and how You have used them, how You have worked through them, how You have blessed them in spite of their decisions, in spite of their rebellions. God, help us to learn from these mistakes and learn from these rebellions, God, and do a better job at following You and following Your guidance and leadership. Thank You for these, Lord, who have taken their time this morning to be here, be a part of this study. And I pray, God, that You would bless us now as we go into the sanctuary, that we would honor You in our worship, that we might lift You up and praise Your name. It's in Christ's name. Amen. Ronnie, could you do us a song next week, you think?
Yeah.
All right, I appreciate it.